I'm Sari.
And I'm Haley.
And this is Seamwork Radio. Welcome back to Seamwork Radio, where we share practical ideas for building a creative process so you can sew with intention and joy. So Haley's out on maternity leave with her new baby, so I have a special guest today. I'm talking to Robin, our pattern development manager here at Seamwork. She's been pattern making with us here at Seamwork for more than 7 years now. And prior to that, Robin worked in the ready-to-wear apparel industry as a pattern maker with companies like Patagonia, UGG, and Hannah Anderson. Robin's going to share all her secrets for developing patterns, from Haley's initial design sketch to the finished PDF patterns you download each month. She'll talk about the process for developing patterns digitally and then fitting them on live models, and she'll explain how the patterns are graded and how they become the final product that you sew with at home. And stay tuned for the next episode, and Robin is going to bust 5 common fitting myths. Robin, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is going to be fun. All right, so we are talking about how patterns get made today. So let's just go through it, and we can start at the very beginning. So what's the first step in the process of transforming what starts as a designer's sketch into a usable pattern? What's the first step?
So the first step, we look through our back catalog and see what we've done in the past that has similar style lines or ease, whether it's a woven or knit fabric. And we find something that's close, not super close, but that has the same details so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel. It's helpful if we don't have to start over from scratch because we've already got pieces and we know the construction and that kind of thing. So we'll find something close and we will alter that to look like the sketch. Add in all the details and the trims and the style lines and check the ease, make sure it reflects Haley's intent for the design. And then we will send that to the sample sewer and she will make a prototype, which we then fit on a live model.
I think that's really interesting because I think a lot of people believe that we start with a sloper every single time and kind of start from scratch every single time. So why is it better to start with an existing pattern versus building it from the ground up?
Yes. So again, that's so that we don't have to redo all the work that we've done in the past and that we know already works. Starting with a sloper would mean adding ease, adding in every style line from scratch, adding sleeve caps and lengths and cutting in for details and pockets. And it would be redoing all of that work. But we've already done that work. So it's more efficient to start from something that we've done recently that we know fits well. We know the shoulders are in the right place or has the details that we already need.
So it saves a lot of time.
So much time.
Yeah. So when Haley gives you a design, what's included in the design sketch? What kinds of things does she give you?
Oh, she gives us so much information. She puts the sketch on a croquis so that we can see about how much ease is in there. She gives us the trims that she wants, sometimes construction techniques. She tells us what kind of fabric the design is intended for so that we know what to develop the prototypes in.
Yeah.
Sometimes she gives us hem heights or collar heights, slit depths, that kind of thing.
So kind of all the details that you would need to know.
Everything that she can think of. Sometimes we decide them on the fly or we look at the sketch and sort of decide proportionally what that looks like because we do want to make the pattern look like the sketch. So if she's showing a 3-inch hem and didn't give us a measurement, we're not going to make a 1/4 inch hem.
So just to kind of paint a picture for people, would all that information be included in the sketch itself? Or are there numbers that go with the sketch? Like how is all this information packaged for you?
She usually has that information under the sketch. She'll show us what she wants it to look like on both size ranges, with and without croquis, front and back. She'll give us inside views so that we can see some of the finishing. And then she'll put all the written information below that. And we transfer all of that to what we call a tech pack. We'll put the sketches in there. We'll put any information she's given us about fabric or trims, and then we'll detail out all of the seam allowance information and construction techniques that we want built into the protos.
See, I think it's so interesting because it's such a partnership between you guys. I think a lot of people think design is this very creative, process of drawing pictures, and pattern making is something very technical, but really it's this symbiosis between the two.
Absolutely. Haley works very close with us. She's at all the fittings. She is the one who fit approves patterns in the end. She decides whether the silhouette is correct or if something needs to be shorter or longer. We work together and we tell her when we don't think something works construction-wise. Our sample sewer weighs in with things that may be hard to sew or would be easier to sew. All of that information. We all work very closely as a team.
Yeah, it's a real team effort. So once you start developing the samples and fitting things, how do you decide what kinds of fabrics that you're going to use to develop those samples in?
So we try to keep it as close as possible to the final fabric that it was designed for. So for instance, if it is a knit with negative ease, we're not going to use a knit with only one-way stretch. Or if it's something made for like a rayon, we're not going to use a muslin, which is very stiff, whereas a rayon is very drapey. We try to keep it as close as possible.
So are there certain fabrics that you turn to again and again?
We do use a lot of muslin. We also use a lot of wool, which is a very lightweight cotton and mimics some of the fabrics that we intend things for a little bit better. Sometimes the thickness can be very important in that. If Haley's designed jeans or something with a very structured look, we'll use denim or we'll use the muslin is very structured. But if she's got something with a lot of folds and a lot of drape, we want to use something lighter weight so that we can mimic the kind of drape that she's intended on the sketch.
Yeah, and that's something that we as home sewers also have to keep in mind when we're making our own muslins and samples at home.
Absolutely. If you're making a muslin or a toile at home and the design has a lot of drape, you maybe don't want to use, say, a denim or a twill. You want to use something that's going to look like the final garment should look and has about the same thickness so that when you're sewing your muslin or toile, you know what you're going to expect when you're sewing your final garment.
Yeah. I think one thing I've heard from a lot of sewers is that when you're making something in knit, it's really hard to make a muslin because all knits behave differently. So how do you handle that when you're making your samples for fitting?
Absolutely. Again, we just try to mimic what the final fabric is supposed to be. So if something has negative ease, we use a 4-way stretch because we know we can achieve that negative ease. And that's why we give stretch measurements in the instructions so that the final user knows how to mimic that.
Yeah.
But yes, different knits have different kinds of stretch. So if the garment is not intended to be a rib, we're not going to sample it in rib. But if it is, and we do have some things that we've intended that rib has much more stretch to it, we want to sample in that so that we can mimic exactly what's going to happen in the end.
Yeah, because they do all behave so differently.
They really do. Yeah.
I know that's something that I've struggled with definitely in making knits and trying to get the right fit is that, unless you make 2 of the same garment, it's hard to know.
Yes, it is. I think it's helpful to kind of expect that you're going to have small changes. Some people I know like to add more of a seam allowance so that it's easier to take in or let out if they need to. But I generally expect that when I make a toile, I'm going to have to make some small adjustments,
Yeah.
For me, it's often taking out curves because I don't have as many. So,
yeah. That's interesting. Are there certain fabrics that you think if somebody's planning to sew their final garment in a certain fabric, for example, that they should make a muslin first for sure because that particular fabric can present problems? Are there certain fabrics that are kind of have those triggers?
Yes. I mean, absolutely. I know it can be more expensive to use the final fabric. Sometimes you can get a less expensive one, maybe in a different color or print, but absolutely, you want to get as close as possible so that you know what's going to happen and you can anticipate final changes if you need to.
Yeah. For me, for knits, that's always an issue, but also things like linen that tend to stretch a lot. I feel like there's a few fabrics like that.
Absolutely. If I was doing a pant in linen or say a rayon viscose, which also has a lot of give to it, I would absolutely want to muslin it in the same kind of fabric.
Yeah, definitely. That's a really great tip. Okay, so we've talked about that process of going from the design to your first pattern, making that sample. So what's the process of fitting and developing the patterns from there?
Oh, yes. So we fit on live models, 1 for each size range. We alternate them week to week. We'll make the first prototype and fit it together. We'll write down the changes, make those adjustments to the pattern, and then rinse and repeat until we have a fit-approved garment. When the models are here, we have them move. We have them pretend to drive a car, all sorts of things, walk, shake their body so that it settles on their body where it would in real-life situations. And we use professional fit models, so they are used to this kind of thing. And they give us such great information about what's happening with it on and how it moves. If something's tight or if there's something scratching in the wrong spot, they're going to let us know. Sometimes it means moving a seam a little bit or adding some ease. Very, very helpful.
Yeah, it's great to work with professionals. We're lucky to live in a place and work in a place where there is an apparel industry. And so that there are these professionals available. So I think people really underestimate the work that goes into being a model, either a photo model or a fit model. It really is a profession and a set of skills.
Yes, the alternative too would be fitting on a form, which can't tell us anything.
Yeah,
and
they don't usually talk.
They don't. We hope they don't. But also, the garments stick to forms because of the material they're made out of. It's not sliding around your skin. There's so much you can't see on a form.
Yeah,
I don't think I could do this without live models.
Yeah, and of course, the movement, like you were just talking about, it really changes things.
Oh yes, we often have them sit down in pants and a skirt so that we know we have enough ease and things aren't wrinkling weird or,
Maybe that's something that people can take away for their own fitting at home, too, is to think about how you move and incorporate more of those kinds of movements. Are there any movements you would specifically tell people to try while they're fitting their clothes at home?
Definitely the hug or drive a car, sit in a chair. You don't need to go overboard. Like, I don't recommend doing jumping jacks in a jumpsuit if you're not going to do jumping jacks normally in your everyday movement. But yeah,
I do them every day, though.
Do you? But walk around, sit down, drive a car, pick your child up, reach for something on a shelf. That's a big one. And that really affects the draft of a pattern because the way we draft sleeves, for instance, they can be drafted for movement. So if we are maybe making a t-shirt or something that is casual and people like live in, as opposed to, a business, I'm going to show up in court or address the CEO of a company. We want to make sure that they can move. If we want them to reach for a top shelf, we know we have to draft that sleeve differently than if we want it super slick and
Yeah. That's a really, really great tip. Are there any challenges you've seen with using live models? Like, I know you mentioned before models changing their bras.
Yes, we try and keep everything consistent.
Yeah.
And different bras can change where things sit on a body or they can even change the measurement. We've seen that happen a lot. So when, for instance, if we are making a strapless dress or something that's more halter, we're going to make sure we've got the right undergarments on them every single time so that we know exactly what's going to happen. And because our models are professional, they're prepared for that.
Yeah.
And we have extra bras and things here that we keep clean so that we can shift things around. And we use the same models all the time. So they're familiar with us. And if we've got one bra for one model, she's the only one wearing it.
Yeah. I think that's another thing people can take away from home is, thinking about the undergarments that you're wearing with the actual garment. So if you're wearing something different when you're sewing, then maybe change into the bra you actually plan to wear with it.
Absolutely. It makes a difference.
Yeah, it really does. I've noticed that myself. Have you ever had a model get stuck in a sample?
That's happened once or twice. Sometimes we miscalculate. We're only human. And if it happens, it's typically only like a first proto. Although recently we have a design coming up where Haley really wanted the neckband to sit on the neck. And I made so many iterations of this neckband. And in the end, most of them were on the fold, so they had extra stretch. In the end, right before the end, I made a two-piece one and she could barely get it over her head.
Really?
Yes. Had to take her ponytail out. She's like, it was still tight. I was like, oh, goodness. Okay, we can't do that.
Don't want to choke anyone.
We don't want to choke. It has to be able to get over your head.
And get off of your head.
And get off. Yes, yes.
I know I've definitely had some moments in dressing rooms of getting stuck in clothing, and It's not pleasant.
It's not, yes. Yes, that's when you really have to breathe and calm down before you pull it off.
Yeah. Have you ever had to cut somebody out of a sample?
Out of a sample or into a sample?
Or into it, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, sometimes we make miscalculations on those first protos, or we miss something we should have thought of and add a slit to the design at the center back.
That's what first protos are for, huh?
That's what first protos are for.
All right, so then what happens after the pattern is tested and it's fit approved?
Okay, so after it's fit approved, we grade the pattern. Then we export them into Adobe Illustrator and pass the patterns off to our technical illustrator, Gina, who makes the instructions. Gina will sew up the pattern as she goes along so that she can create accurate illustrations and get all the steps right. Once the instructions are complete, we create the labels for each piece, isolate the smallest and the largest sizes, and send them to our technical editor. She will sew up those smallest and largest sizes to the letter with the instructions and pass back notes on the pattern pieces and on the instructions. And then we'll update all of those and send them out to our copy editor, who does copy edit notes, which is mostly on wording. But she checks all the links and she checks the measurement charts and things like that.
She kind of makes sure everything is picture perfect.
Exactly. Yes. After they come back from our copy editor, we update any last minute things, and then we lay out all the pattern pieces in the 16 different forms of, not 16 different forms. I think it's 4 different forms of PDF files, projector, AO, printed home, etc.
Yeah.
For both size ranges. And then we pass them off to our lovely ambassadors.
And they kind of test them out and give us any feedback.
They test them out and give us any feedback. At that point, there's really isn't much to change, but sometimes there's a word missing in the instructions or, little small things that we have to update.
Yeah, they find all those things, and they also can sew them in different sizes and things like that.
Exactly. And they can really clue us into when something that we think is clear isn't as clear as we think it is, because we do it every day. So we're so used to what we're seeing that our eyes miss things sometimes. And we forget that, we know things that not everybody knows. So they're really great about cluing us into those things so that we can make sure that we are as clear as we can be.
Yeah, when you're so close to it, sometimes you don't see all the things that somebody looking at it from the outside can see.
Absolutely. I'm notorious for that.
I think everybody has that issue. So you talked about kind of the whole process of putting the pattern together, start to finish. What kinds of tools and software are you using for this?
So we use a system called Optitex. It is a specific pattern drafting system in 2D, although they do have a 3D component. It has so many tools that mimic what you would do on paper patterns, but on your keyboard, so that we can see everything laid out. It can make measurement charts, measure all the seams, measure caps and armholes, and it's really a fantastic program. There are other programs, but that's the one that we use.
Yeah.
We also use Adobe Illustrator. That's where we make all the labels and the pattern brushes that you see when you open up a paper pattern. Each size is in a different pattern brush. And we use Excel for the tech packs, but those are the main ones.
Yeah. So what about 3D pattern making? I know that's something that I've heard talked about quite a bit.
Yeah, 3D pattern making, it's been around for a while, but it's really making advanced strides now. We don't use it. I think it's really advantageous for ready-to-wear companies that send patterns overseas or have factories overseas, because it can save a lot of shipping costs and shipping time. Sometimes companies wait a month or two for the next prototype to come back. But we have an in-house sample sewer, so we can update things instantaneously and have them sewn in a day.
Yeah. I know it saves a lot of time to do 3D. Do you think it gives you all the same information that actually sewing up the sample physically would give you?
No, I really don't. There's so many things that you see when you sew something up that you don't see when you don't. But it really, every time I sew up one of our samples, when I'm developing it, I learn things about it. And you don't get that in 3D. Mostly it's for okay, we have some wrinkles here, and I think it's this pattern change. So you can make that pattern change, and the system will show you what it looks like on a body. My concerns with it, and I haven't done a lot of research with it, is that I don't know that it encompasses all of the other measurements in a body. You can tell at the bust, you can tell at the waist and the sweep and the cup size and the bicep. But what about the height between your waist and your underarm, which is already ambiguous because there's no line on our body. We're not Barbies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's so many other little measurements. Or the difference between your center front and the side seam and your side seam and the center back. Like, can you tell those systems what exactly you want those measurements to be?
Yeah.
And plus, those seams can move too.
Mm-hmm.
So it just feels a little not exact to me. But again, I haven't done a lot of research, and it's definitely something we would be interested in looking into.
Yeah. And I know Erin, our other pattern maker, has some experience with it.
She does. She's worked with Chloe. I believe Optitex also has a 3D system.
Yeah.
I'm letting them get all the kinks out and improve it as much as they can before I get into it. But Erin liked it. Yeah.
I could see it both ways. I could see it being useful for just a first pass. And then also I could see it being not as useful as just sewing the prototype. So
right. Yeah.
that's something we can learn a little bit more about. So we've talked about, a lot about the drafting. What about actually grading a pattern into different sizes?
Ooh, yeah. There is so much to grading. So the first thing to know about grading is how much the measurements increase between sizes. And this is actually pretty standard industry-wide. For the body circumference, that's the bust, the waist, the hip, sizes typically increase and decrease in 1-inch increments up to about a size 8.
Mm-hmm.
From an 8 to a 12, it's 1.5 inches in the total circumference, and above that, 2 inches. And then there's also length and height grades, things like that.
So tell me a little bit about that. Why is it that the grade is smaller in smaller sizes and larger in larger sizes?
That's because it's related to the total circumference. What it increases and decreases is, for example, it's not a percentage, but that's the example. It's a percentage. It's a portion of that total circumference. And when the total circumference is a smaller number, 1 inch is a bigger proportion of that than if the total circumference was a larger number. So we try and keep it proportionally incremental changes.
That makes a lot of sense. So 1 inch is a larger proportion of, for example, a size 0 than 1 inch is for a size 18, 20, or anything.
Exactly. It wouldn't be enough of a change to see on the body.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense. You mentioned that the grade happens not just in the circumference, but also vertically. Can you talk a little bit more about that and why that is?
Absolutely. So we grade our lengths between center front, on a top between center front and waist, 1/4 inch per size.
Mm-hmm.
And the same for our bottoms, 1/4 inch per size. Typically, everybody has a different height. Lengths and heights are the easiest things to fix on your pattern. But the way growing works, there are people who don't grow taller, but as sizing goes up, we have a lot of tall people.
Mm-hmm.
And so that grades that.
Like statistically, a taller person is more likely to be a larger size.
Correct.
Is that true?
Yes. As you get taller, you also grow. Your bones grow both ways.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to accommodate the people who are as well getting taller.
Yeah. And then you have curves to accommodate for as well vertically.
Yes. As you get curvier, you're going to need more fabric lengthwise to go around those curves. So we try to account for that as well.
Yeah. That makes sense too. I know there's a lot of confusion, I think. I've seen confusion about why when something grows in size, height grows as well. But it makes a lot of sense when you think about it statistically. That's just how sizing works. And you're trying to accommodate the most people into that size that you can.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. So what happens after grading then?
Well, there's more to grading.
Oh, okay. Tell me more about grading.
Okay. So once you know that total circumference grade,
mm-hmm.
what the pattern maker needs to do is divide that grade between the different points on the body
mm-hmm.
all the way around. So it'll be smaller measurements at each point, and they will all add up to that total circumference grade.
Okay.
So that way, if you have, say, a dress with princess seams,
mm-hmm.
that total grade is going to be divided in there too, so that all the different parts of the garment grow proportionally.
Okay. And how does that work in Optitex, in the system? Like, how do you actually do that?
So there are grade tables, which the system has blank tables and we build in the amounts. And what it does is each rule, for instance, a side seam bust point or a center front neck point, we tell the system how much we want that point to move in the X and Y axis.
Okay.
And we assign names to each point and apply them during the grading process for both our size ranges. But then that's sort of the high level view of it. You can't just apply all the points and be done with it. You really have to consider the proportions of the garments, the pockets, darts, so many smaller things that when they all come together, everything grows in the right amount and looks right.
So it's sort of, you apply these rules, but then you have to kind of fact check them.
Exactly. We check all the seams and the measurements to make sure everything is matching. And there's also something called holding the grade. And that's where you can say, okay, I want this sleeve to grow a 1/2 inch each size, but stop at size 24. I don't want it to grow any more past there. So we can tell the system to do that so that we don't get too big in certain areas or too small. That happens.
Does that come up a lot?
Not a lot. We do it sometimes on the larger sizes because not everything grows. Shoulders don't grow as much as busts.
Oh, yeah. That makes sense.
Right. And limbs don't get longer. You know, if you had that grade, a large grade on a sleeve, your sleeve could be down to your knees.
Yeah. Could just get longer and longer.
and longer. So sometimes we hold the grade so that things like that don't happen.
Yeah. So when you have these rules set, are you able to apply those rules to different patterns? Or is it a different set of rules for each pattern?
No, we have a different set of rules for the 2 different size ranges, but we use the same rules on every pattern. And then we also consider the style lines and where things are growing and where we have seams.
So then you can go in and make adjustments and things.
Exactly. For instance, something with a drop shoulder. So we have a point called shoulder armhole. But we wouldn't apply that point to a drop shoulder because a drop shoulder is also covering the cap.
Yeah.
So for something like that, it either needs a new point assigned to it, or we have to think about how much we want that cap to grow, as well as the shoulder, and add those together so that if that seam is halfway down your upper arm, it's growing in the right way. It's growing enough, but not too much.
Oh, that's really interesting. So then what do you do from that point? Like once you have those grade rules applied, what happens?
Then we check all the measurements. Sometimes we isolate sizes to put, say, pockets on a pant to make sure that the pocket looks the correct proportion to the pant. We'll do that for different sizes and make sure everything looks right. And then we'll export the patterns and send them to Gina to illustrate the instructions.
Yeah, and we talked about that a little bit. So then Gina does the instructions, and that's when the whole editing process starts once that's done.
Yes.
Cool. All right. Well, are there any myths about pattern making that you would like to debunk?
Oh, probably several. That might be another episode, though.
Yeah. Let's do another episode on that. We'll talk about pattern making myths.
I'm excited for that one.
That Robin can debunk for us. Well, thank you so much, Robin. It was great having you on today.
It's my pleasure. I love talking about pattern making.
I'm sure everybody loves hearing the story of how a pattern goes from a sketch all the way to a final pattern that you guys can produce at home. It's really cool to see behind the scenes, I think.
Yeah.
For our community. Well, I would just want to talk a little bit about our community before we go. We are lucky to have some of the nicest and most helpful sewists you can imagine in our private community, and that includes our professional pattern makers. So our team, along with thousands of seam workers, are here to talk to you and cheer you on, and you can ask any question about sewing with absolutely no judgment, and you'll always get some amazing answers. You can also share your finished projects and create goals, and we'll even email you reminders to keep you on track. So it's the perfect place to go if you need a quick boost of creative energy. And if you liked this episode, we would love it if you would leave us a review. We really appreciate every review we get, and we love to hear from you guys. So if you have a second, just give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen. You can also follow us on YouTube at Seamwork Video. You could follow us on Instagram at Seamwork. And if you'd like to join Seamwork and become part of our private community that I just mentioned, plus get access to hundreds of sewing patterns and dozens of sew-along classes, our podcast listeners get a 50% off lifetime discount when you join at seamwork.com/go/podcast50. So that's seamwork.com/go/podcast50. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Sari.
And I'm Robin.
And this is Seamwork Radio. Seamwork Radio is brought to you by the team at Seamwork. Seamwork's an online community that supports you in creating a wardrobe that feels right for you. When you join us at Seamwork, you become part of our private community of makers, and you also get access to monthly sew-along classes, a library of over 200 sewing patterns, and tons of great resources to help guide you through the sewing adventure that you choose. Podcast listeners can get half off a Seamwork Unlimited membership, which means you can download as many of those 200 plus patterns as you want at any time, and our community will be there to guide and support you. If you'd like to join us for half off, just visit seamwork.com/go/podcast50. You can also find us on Instagram at Seamwork, or visit our YouTube channel, which is called Seamwork Video. We love hearing from you, so let us know if there's a topic or a personal story that you'd like us to cover. Thanks for listening to Seamwork Radio.